She was the most dazzling little princess of the empire. Yet in her father's eyes, she was forever a worthless girl who could never compare to her brother. Simply because her mother died in childbirth while giving birth to her, her father placed all the blame on his daughter. From a young age, she had never felt even the slightest bit of fatherly love. Yet she learned early on that in everything, she had to give way to her brother. In the girl's eyes, her brother was just a useless fool. But no matter how outstanding she was, her father never once cared to spare her a glance. The man gave all his favoritism to his mediocre son, and all he left for his daughter was a cold, indifferent back. Thus, jealousy clouded the little princess's eyes, and she twisted her longing for her family into hatred, venting it on her brother more and more viciously. She was like a child who could never get candy, naively believing that as long as she made a fuss, she could win more attention. But in truth, a child who is not loved does not even have the right to be willful. All her actions would bring her was even crueler punishment. And so, the little princess grew up painfully in her brother's shadow, without the nourishment of love. The little bit of goodness left in the girl's heart withered away day by day under the weight of repression. She came to hate that foolish brother more and more, wishing he would die immediately. The little princess obsessively thought that if only her brother were gone, perhaps her father would love her a little more. But the truth was, even if she personally killed that useless brother, there was still no room for her in her father's eyes. At that moment, the little princess fell into complete despair. She no longer hoped for that unattainable family affection, and instead sent that man to hell as well. After committing patricide and fratricide, that pure and kind little princess could never return again. She began ruthlessly suppressing the ministers who opposed her. The girl naively believed that this version of herself had finally become worthy of love. Yet she never expected that the man she loved would rather kill himself than be with her. At the same time, the long-simmering dissatisfaction of the people was also quietly brewing in the shadows. In the end, the empress of a generation was sent to the guillotine in a riot, bringing her absurd and short life to an end. However, the story did not end there, for the little princess was actually reborn. She had finally managed to calmly accept her own death. So this outcome was something the girl could not accept for a while. But with the experience of her previous life, after being reborn, she decided to become a kind person. The seat of the tyrant emperor could be left for someone else to take. She did not want to go through that guilt and helplessness in the dead of night a second time. The little princess decided to live this life plainly, but what she did not expect was that the brother she hated most in her previous life was actually obsessed with his little sister, and that her father was not as awful as she had imagined. She thought her brother did not love her, and had even deliberately taken away their father's affection. So she pierced that man's heart without the slightest hesitation. But until the very end of his life, her brother still gently comforted her, telling her not to cry. In the little princess's memory, her brother always seemed to be someone who, apart from pestering her to play, would only grin foolishly. Even though her disgust had long been written all over her face, that person acted as if he could see nothing at all. Impossible to push away, impossible to drive off, even more annoying than a stubborn plaster. The little princess could not even remember how many times she had bullied her brother. Yet that person always seemed to come with gifts and had never once blamed her. Sometimes, when he was bullied too harshly, he would secretly cry by himself. But after crying, he would once again become the clingy little follower by his sister's side. He treated his little sister as the most important family in his life. Yet by then, the little princess had already been blinded by jealousy. She saw her brother's closeness as a kind of flaunting, and under her father's day after day favoritism, the seed of hatred had long since taken root and sprouted in the girl's heart. In the end, these siblings, who should have been inseparable, still came to cross swords with one another. But until the very last moment of his life, her brother could not bear to hurt the little sister he had cherished in the palm of his hand. The cold blade pierced through his chest, yet even that pain was still less unbearable than the sorrow brought by his sister's tears. This was all his fault. Thinking of this, the young man gently brushed the girl's cheek, as gentle as when he used to comfort her as a child. The boy forced out a smile uglier than crying. "Don't cry. If you keep crying, you won't look pretty anymore." But before he could finish speaking, his head dropped heavily, and he never woke again. Recalling everything from her previous life, those bloody and sorrowful memories were still vivid before her eyes, and the little princess let out a helpless sigh. And just at that moment, two soft, pale arms had already wrapped around her neck. Then came a loud smacking sound, and her brother happily bit into her little cheek, as if slurping jelly. She frowned in displeasure. Sure enough, one should never show mercy to an enemy. But no matter how much she disliked it, the little princess did not push him away in disgust as she had in her previous life. However, her indifferent attitude still made a certain sister-obsessed boy feel sullen. He had never imagined that one day he would have to be jealous of a book. At that moment, however, the wet nurse of the emperor's little princess suddenly came in. She advised the eldest prince not to disturb his sister's studies, but when she turned her head, she was shocked to discover that the girl was reading the profound history of Yubara. This kind of book was not something a young child could possibly understand. Yet the little princess was reading it with great interest. Not only that, She could accurately state the exact year in which each event had taken place. The wet nurse was so astonished by the girl's intelligence that she was left speechless, and immediately wanted to report her little mistress's excellence to His Majesty. But the little princess anxiously stopped her. Having come back once, she did not want any contact with that scumbag father. Yet, unexpectedly, 2 days later, the two of them ran into each other in the garden. He had ignored his daughter all year round, yet after meeting her for the first time, he immediately began trying every possible way to make things difficult for her. Unfortunately for him, the reborn little princess was no longer that child longing to be loved. Faced with her father's cold and vicious words, the little princess chose to ignore him outright. Once upon a time, she too would cry because of her father's scolding and would desperately struggle for a word of praise she could never obtain. But those delicate feelings had long since been worn numb by the grinding of time. Now, she only wanted to escape from her father's side as quickly as possible. But the emperor did not give her that chance. He rudely called out to his daughter, and in a tone of disdain, rebuked the little princess for being arrogant and disrespectful. But the girl had long since grown used to such humiliation. She let out a helpless sigh, then gracefully lifted the hem of her skirt, displaying perfect etiquette without the slightest flaw. And the emperor was also surprised by his daughter's calmness, far beyond her years. Unfortunately, this alone was still not enough to make him see her in a different light. Thankfully, at that moment the wet nurse suddenly spoke up, saying that the royal little princess could recite by heart the history of the empire's years of turmoil. This made the emperor look at his daughter with a little more scrutiny in his eyes. After all, not even the most learned teacher in the empire would dare make such an arrogant claim. So he concluded that this was merely a child's little trick to compete for favor. But the more he thought so, the more he wanted to expose his daughter's lie with his own hands. Thus the emperor arrogantly told the little princess to recite it for him. Unexpectedly, the child actually had the audacity to start bargaining with him. In truth, the little princess did not want to display herself in front of her scumbag father at all. The experiences of her previous life had already made one thing painfully clear to her. All her efforts had been nothing more than a laughable act of self-moved delusion. Her talents, her swordsmanship, she had learned them all only to win her father's favor. She had never truly lived for herself. Thinking of this, the little princess proposed a wager with her father. If she could recite it, she would receive a reward of her choosing. And if she could not, she was willing to accept any punishment. It was the first time someone had dared to be so insolent, and the emperor's face darkened at once. But he had already convinced himself that this was merely the little princess bluffing, so the man chose to agree. He wanted this dishonest daughter to make a fool of herself in public. But the slap in the face came without warning. The girl not only recited the complete lineages of the great families, but could also accurately analyze every important historical event. At that moment, a trace of hard-to-detect admiration flashed through the emperor's eyes. But the next second, he frowned again in displeasure, because no matter how outstanding this daughter might be, unable to wield the power of the spirits, she would ultimately remain a stain on the royal family, and she was still the chief culprit in the death of his beloved wife. Thinking of this, the man's gaze toward his daughter returned to one of disgust. What he did not know, however, was that one day in the future, he would regret everything he had done today for the rest of his life. She refused the love her brother offered, because the little princess felt that someone as lowly as herself was simply unworthy of a kind brother like him. She was a rat in the gutter, filthy mud unfit to see the light of day. After doing so many wrong things, she did not deserve her brother's forgiveness. So when the eldest prince came to find her, the little princess chose to quietly avoid him. In this life, she no longer longed for her family's love. Yet what she did not expect was that her brother had come to find her in order to show her the spirit magic he had just learned. Watching the light orbs dancing all across the sky, the girl was once again dragged into painful memories. In her previous life, even until death, she had never been able to summon a light spirit. And because of that, the emperor had completely regarded her as a stain on the family and excluded her from that tradition. She was not even allowed to attend school together with her brother. And among the common people, all that spread were slanders about her. Under such unfair treatment, the girl had cried, and she had raged, but in the end she still chose to overthrow the regime. She personally seized the authority of the spirits, and all of it had merely been done for her father to see. Until the day she died, she had been trying to prove that she deserved love just as much as her brother, yet in the end all she got was total ruin and disgrace. Thinking of this, the little princess let out a deep sigh. She should not let those unbearable memories disturb her mind any longer. Just as she was preparing to quietly slip away through the side door, she happened to crash straight into someone coming in. She fell heavily to the ground, yet it was as if she felt no pain at all, because this black-haired boy was the man she had loved but could never obtain in her previous life. In an instant, tears welled up in the little princess's eyes. Along with the joy of having regained what was lost, there was also endless guilt. Back then, she had been so stubborn and extreme that even though she knew Tywin had someone he loved, she had still forced him to marry her. She naively believed that if she gave enough of herself, she would earn the right to be loved, never realizing that doing so would only invite even deeper hatred. But at the time, She had been like a self-righteous clown, stubbornly believing that as long as his beloved disappeared, Tywin would fall in love with her. Yet she never expected that he would rather die than see her even once. Thinking of this, tears slid from the corners of the girl's eyes. Like a child who had done something wrong, she apologetically told Tywin she was sorry, and the boy thought he had simply bumped into her too hard. So he gently handed her his handkerchief. He simply had not expected that not only would the little princess not blame him, but that she would sadly say she had missed him very much. The strange reaction left Tywin completely confused. He remembered that he had never seen such a beautiful child before, but the next second, the eldest prince suddenly rushed out. Seeing the tearful little face of his sister, he immediately punched his friend in the face, right in front of her brother. His little sister had actually been bullied into tears, so the eldest prince did not say a word and swung his fist at his friend. This directly left little Dorothy staring in shock. She had never expected that her weak and useless brother could also have such a violent side. Seeing that the boy still wanted to keep fighting, the girl hurriedly stopped the farce, because she did not want Tywin to hate her because of it. So she could only helplessly explain to her brother that sand had gotten into her eyes. "Are you feeling better now?" Although her injured ankle still hurt badly. In order to reassure her brother, she still pretended to be strong and took a few steps. It was difficult not to feel fondness for such a kind girl, especially when her status was that of a noble imperial princess. So Tywin gave the little princess a gentle smile, then lightly pressed a kiss to the back of her hand. The distance between them was so close, as if all the ugly hatred of their previous life had already ceased to exist. The little princess deceived herself into thinking that this was heaven's mercy, giving her a chance to begin again. She would renew her bond with Tywin. A sweet female voice interrupted her thoughts, like a bucket of cold water that extinguished all the little princess's fantasies. Little Dorothy looked up and saw the face she had hated most in her previous life. She was so innocent and lovely, forming a sharp contrast with her own gloomy and violent self. No wonder Tywin had kept in contact with her even after marriage. Ridiculous and foolish as she had been, she had once treated Julia as the third party who ruined their relationship, never realizing that she herself had been the unnecessary extra in this story. The little princess quietly watched the three of them getting along so harmoniously, and that kind of happiness was something she could never be part of. So it turned out that on that day, she had been like an unnecessary background prop, nothing more than a foil to highlight the beauty of the main characters. She had naively believed that as long as she remained kind, she would find happiness, but now it seemed that happiness had nothing to do with her at all. The more the little princess thought about it, the more she felt like a pitiful clown. So she fled in a sorry state. Even though a piercing pain shot through her ankle, it was still not as intense as the pain in her heart. The injured girl hid away in her room on her own, and at last, she had tucked herself into a place where sunlight could not reach. Only in the darkness did the little princess feel at ease. It was not that she could not bear to let go. She just could not understand why she was always the one who got hurt. After waking from a nap, the girl returned to her usual tsundere self. She still sat quietly reading, using a strong exterior to protect that heart riddled with wounds. But what she did not expect was that a few days later, her father would publicly humiliate her at her brother's coronation ceremony. That day was the coronation ceremony, at which her brother would become crown prince. The little princess had originally refused to attend, but unfortunately, as a member of the royal family, she had to be present. So, under her brother's persistent coaxing, the little princess still braced herself and went along. The solemn and majestic hall was crowded with guests, and even at such a moment, her brother had not forgotten to grin foolishly at her. The little princess below the stage could not help rolling her eyes. She also expressed deep concern about the future of the empire. Unfortunately, none of that was something she should be thinking about. She should have let go of the past long ago and simply played the role of this unloved imperial princess. Yet at that very moment, the emperor appeared. With a proud expression, he placed the crown on his son's head. That proud look deeply stabbed at the little princess's heart. What kind of expression would her father wear when looking at her? Most of the time, probably nothing but disgust. She lowered her head sadly, silently. She stood outside the crowd. All she could hear around her was praise, compliments, all of it for her brother, and she could only watch from afar. She did not even have the right to stand in the same row beside him, even though she had long expected things would turn out like this. The little princess's heart still ached wave after wave. At that moment, her attentive brother noticed his sister's disappointment. He blinked at her, but the little princess sadly looked away. She was afraid she would become jealous, that she would lose control, and show an even more humiliating side of herself, so the little princess chose to ignore him. But unexpectedly, the moment she turned around, she bumped into a minister who was coming to offer a toast. The wine instantly soaked the girl's clothes, and she stood there frozen in embarrassment. But just at that moment, a sharp, stern male voice suddenly rang out above her head. It was her father. Yet not only did he fail to stand up for his daughter, he coldly told the little princess to apologize. So it turned out that, unloved as she was not even worth as much as an ordinary minister. But she had clearly done nothing wrong. The more the girl thought about it, the more wronged she felt, yet she still lowered herself. But in the end, she still lowered her proud head. It's alright, wasn't it just her dignity she had lost? In any case, the fact that she was unloved had long ceased to be a secret. So, under everyone's gaze, the proud imperial princess apologized to a minister in the humblest manner possible. At that moment, it was as if she had been nailed to the pillar of shame. Yet when she looked up, she met Tywin's worried gaze, and Julia's as well. Were they both pitying her? In an instant, the little princess felt as though the noisy hall had lost all sound, and all she wanted was to find somewhere to hide immediately. Anywhere would do. She did not want the person she liked to see her in such a miserable state. She had already been so kind, tried so hard. So why did fate still have to hurt her again and again? The little princess, who had retreated back to her room, hugged herself tightly in grievance. She neither cried nor made a fuss, but that curled-up figure of hers was heartbreakingly painful to look at. At that moment, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Outside the door was her brother, greeting her with concern. But to her ears, it sounded exceptionally noisy. Why did everyone have to come pity her? Just because she was unloved? Right now, all she wanted was to be alone in peace. Why was even this little bit of right something they were unwilling to give her? The little princess completely broke down. She roared loudly at her brother, but when she turned around, she saw the figure of her beloved. Why did heaven have to treat her like this? First, it made her lose her dignity in front of Tywin, and now it was forcing her to reveal a violent, cruel side of herself. Was it because she had been greedy? Because she had yearned for a love that did not belong to her? So even the chance to regret was something heaven would take away from her as well? Thinking of this, the little princess ran away once again. She slammed the bedroom doors shut heavily. Then she collapsed to the floor in dejection. When she lost her family's love, she could still deceive herself and offer herself comfort. But after losing love, she truly had nothing left. Even though she did not want to admit it, the little princess understood. She and Tywin could never be together again. After that day, the girl fell seriously ill. Burning with a high fever, she lay weakly bedridden. But the only one staying by her side to care for her was a clumsy maid. Her father was probably hoping she would hurry up and die from the illness. And her brother had probably started to dislike her too. The little princess thought this in self-abandonment. But she did not expect that the eldest prince would actually come to see her. He fumbled nervously while hiding behind the door. Only after being noticed by his sister did he walk in awkwardly. And in his hands, he was holding a basket of fresh tomatoes still covered with dew. This was the apology gift he had prepared for his sister. Making her cry at the coronation ceremony had filled him with guilt all this time. Fortunately, this time, the little princess did not push him away like she had that day. So he kindly suggested that his sister go out of the palace for a walk. If she stayed cooped up in her chambers all day, it would make her sick at heart. No one had expected that one careless suggestion of his would personally push the little princess into hell. They were inseparable twins, but their father only favored the brother, who could use magic. The pure and kind younger sister was not liked by anyone. She was not even rescued after being kidnapped. Ever since being humiliated in public that day, the little princess had completely learned her lesson. Unfavored as she was, she no longer dared to hope for her father's attention. She did not even want her status as a princess anymore. Now, all she wanted was to completely give up, but her sister-obsessed brother refused to allow it. He could not bear to watch his little sister sink little by little into negative emotions. He practically tried every possible way to coax her into going out, whether it was clingy pestering like a little shadow, or pitiful pleading like an innocent puppy. He even slipped invitation notes into her books from time to time. The eldest prince had nearly exhausted every trick he had. At last, his sister agreed to go out and relax. But on one condition: this clingy brother could not come along. Hearing this, the eldest prince felt both relieved and sad. But for the sake of making his sister happy, this bit of grievance was nothing. So, with the maid's help, the little princess changed into her prettiest dress. Her sweet and adorable appearance made her look like an exquisite doll in a display window. After that, mistress and servant came to the most bustling street in the empire. This was the little princess's first time leaving the palace after being reborn. The bustling marketplace made her lose herself for a moment. In her previous life, she too had once set foot on this land, yet all she had seen then had been devastation everywhere. It had been a human hell personally created by her, the tyrant. So without her rule, this place was actually such a peaceful and prosperous world. The little princess's feelings became even more complicated. Yet at that moment, the maid gently held her little hand. That sudden warmth filled the unease in the girl's heart. Perhaps she really should calm down and feel this hard-won peace. Even if she was not loved, so what? These were sins she ought to repay. It was just that the little princess never expected that the more peaceful the surface appeared, the more rampant the darkness hidden in the corners would become. The richly dressed girl quickly became a kidnapping target in the eyes of the thugs. In a corner where no one passed by, sinful hands reached out toward them. The maid was brutally knocked unconscious by a wooden club from behind, and the little princess also lost consciousness under the effects of a drug. When she woke up again, it was already 3 days later, and there was not a single part of her body that did not hurt. And having gone without food or water for so long had also left her weak to the extreme. From what the kidnappers said, the maid had already been sent back to demand ransom, but a full 3 days had passed, and she still had not returned. If this kept up, they were preparing to kill the hostage. She was a high-born genius princess, but as long as her brother was still there, she was worthless trash. So, what if she had been kidnapped? Her father would only think she was a disgrace. During the first few days, the little princess had still deceived herself into thinking that no matter how much her father disliked her, he surely could not bear for his daughter to suffer. But as time passed little by little, the little princess finally slowly realized that her father did not care at all whether she lived or died. The maid who had gone to report the news had already been back for a full 3 days. In other words, the palace was not in any hurry to rescue her. Ridiculously, just a second ago, she had still been fantasizing that her father would worry about her. The next second, reality wounded her beyond recognition. If the one who had gone missing were her brother, her father would probably have long since become frantic with worry. Maybe he was even celebrating now that it was this useless daughter who had been taken. So a child who was not loved could only rely on herself. The little princess trembled in heartache and could only laugh at her own foolishness. At this moment, she had already gone 3 or 4 days without eating. If this kept up, she would really starve to death alive. But a frail little girl could hardly be a match for 2 kidnappers. So the clever little princess came up with an idea in desperation. She thought of a dangerous but possibly life-saving method. The girl disguised herself as an ignorant, innocent rich child, wearing that harmless little face. Her performance indeed made the kidnappers instantly lower their guard. At the very least, she no longer had to remain tied up all the time. The girl gently moved her stiff wrists. She began using sweet words to curry favor with the 2 foolish kidnappers. As long as she could hold on a few more days, she would find a chance to escape. However, such days did not last very long. The kidnappers, unable to get the ransom, became more and more anxious, and their attitude toward the little princess grew worse with each passing day. Sometimes they even punched and kicked her, because if this continued, she would never last until the day she could escape. Yet heaven gave the little princess another chance to live. That day was the same as usual. The 2 kidnappers were discussing what to do next, but a huge poisonous scorpion quietly crawled into the wooden hut. Its pitch-black tail stinger gleamed with a strange, cold light. In an instant, the 2 ferocious kidnappers were so frightened that they huddled together. The little princess knew her chance had come, even though she was just as afraid of bugs. This was an opportunity she had to seize. So the girl took the chance to make a proposal to the kidnappers. If she could catch the scorpion, they should temporarily untie her. But the little princess did not expect that even after freeing herself from the ropes, she still could not escape this boundless desert. The little princess, only 8 years old, had been kidnapped, and even though he knew his daughter might die, her scumbag father would not even pay a ransom of several hundred million. At the critical moment, she could only choose to save herself bravely. She used her obedient and harmless appearance to win the kidnappers' trust. She even took the initiative to help them get rid of the poisonous scorpion. Such compliant behavior also earned her a brief freedom. The girl had originally thought that her chance had finally come, but when she walked out of the wooden hut, she realized that outside was actually a desert stretching beyond sight. The surging yellow sand blocked the direction back home. No wonder those 2 stupid thieves had let her wander around freely. However, the little princess's panic lasted only for an instant. Very quickly, she forced herself to calm down. Trying to cross the desert on foot was nearly an impossible task. And now, all she could do was wait in despair for her father's rescue. So the girl quietly retreated back in from outside. But she had not expected that the 2 kidnappers were discussing how to kill her. At that moment, the little princess only felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Had her father released the news that the princess was missing? Had he never considered that the kidnappers might kill her because of it? Or was it that he simply could not be bothered to think about it at all? After all, an unfavored imperial princess was worth less than even a minister. What was more, she was a useless waste who could not use magic. Thinking of this, the girl laughed self-mockingly. Before this, she had always thought that if she did not fight or compete, she could live this life in peace. But only at this very moment did she finally realize how laughably wrong she had been. The girl tightened her grip on the dagger in her hand. At that moment, she suddenly understood that endless tolerance had never been true kindness. It was nothing more than an excuse used by the weak to cover up their own helplessness. And at this moment, she also made a bold decision. In her previous life, she had been the Empire's strongest swordmaster. Her father and brother had both once died by her blade, and what the little princess had to do now was use force to subdue those 2 enemies. The girl's movements were clean and swift. With just one strike, she stabbed the man's shoulder until blood poured out. But she still could not harden her heart enough to kill him. Yet in a duel where life and death were at stake, this kindness was fatal instead. The little princess's throat was gripped tightly by the man. She struggled desperately, but the large hand around her neck only tightened more and more. The girl could clearly feel her life slipping away little by little. And just then, she heard the man's merciless mockery. "No matter how hard you resist, it's useless." These words seemed to mock the girl's miserable life. In her previous life, she had resisted desperately, yet she had never been able to surpass her brother. She could not go to the school she wanted to attend. She could not wait for her father's concern. Even until death, she had not received the sincere love of a single person, but all she wanted was to live. That was all. In an instant, the frail little princess completely went mad. She violently broke free from the man's restraint. Her attacks, filled with hatred, fell again and again upon the kidnapper, and her terrifying appearance resembled an evil ghost crawling out of hell. That was the coldest contempt for life held by one in power. At that moment, the kidnapper was scared so badly, he nearly wet himself. Just when he thought the little princess was about to end him with her own hands, the girl turned away in exhaustion. "Please, stop provoking me. I only want to live kindly." After saying that, she dragged her injured body and stepped into the endless desert. The kidnapped little princess ultimately still did not wait for her father's rescue. She could only drag her injured body alone, stumbling miserably through the desert. The coarse sand and gravel lashed against her body, but who would know how much pain she was in? She numbly walked in the direction of home, yet she did not know why she still wanted to go back, because no one at all would be waiting for her return. Her brother had their father's concern. Julia had Tywin's protection. Only she had nothing. So where exactly had she gone wrong? The little princess thought in grievance. If she had been a boy, or if she too could use spirit magic, would her father have treated her differently? But all of that was ultimately only an illusion, like a mirage. Now, the only thing surrounding her was boundless despair. As time passed, the sky gradually darkened as well. The biting cold wind cut across the girl like knives. Shivering all over, she hugged herself tightly. The next second, she fell heavily to the ground. She was truly too tired. If she died here just like this, perhaps it would be a kind of release. At least she would not have to face her father's ridicule anymore. Her brother would probably be happy too. After all, he would be rid of an annoying sister like her. The little princess had already prepared herself to face death calmly. Just looking at the beautiful starry sky and the sea of sand like this, and then quietly dying, such an ending did not seem all that hard to accept. Just as the girl was little by little giving up hope of living, tiny lights lit up in the distance, as if that glow would set the entire desert ablaze. And in the little princess's heart, the hope of living also ignited once more. Maybe that was not her father's army at all, but she still wanted to gamble once. So the girl staggered to her feet. She waved her arms with all her strength. She fell again and again, yet again and again. She stubbornly stood back up, and fate did not fail her efforts. The ones who came were indeed the army sent by the emperor. After the leading knight clearly saw the girl's face, he immediately rushed over, and the little princess finally let out a complete sigh of relief. As if all strength had left her in an instant, she collapsed heavily to the ground. Yet her heart was filled with joy, thankful that her father had not abandoned her after all. But this little fantasy did not last long in the end. When she woke again, what greeted her instead was her father's piercing and unbearable scolding. Despised by her father, hurt by her brother, yet she still deeply loved this terrible family of hers. The gravely injured little princess finally woke from her coma. In her haze, she saw that familiar figure through the crack in the door. That was her father's voice. So that person really did care about her after all. In an instant, all her grievances turned into tears of happiness. She ignored the pain in her body, ignored the dizziness brought on by the high fever, and only wanted to run over and throw herself into her father's arms. But the next second, she froze where she stood. Her father seemed to be angry. That man said she had brought shame on him, and said she was nothing but a troublemaker who only caused problems. So the royal family's dignity really was more important than his daughter's life. And even if she did nothing at all, her father still would not like her. Ridiculously, she had even affectionately assumed that the emperor had come specifically to see her. So the little princess tiptoed lightly back to the bed, then told herself again and again that all of this was atonement for the evil deeds of her previous life. Otherwise, she truly would not be able to hold on any longer. Time flew by, and half a month had passed in the blink of an eye. But the little princess's illness showed no sign of getting better. Seeing this, the doctors could only admit that there was nothing they could do. Only the girl herself knew that it was caused by long-term emotional repression. Ever since her father had shown that bit of mercy, he had never come to see her again, and all the maids who had remained by her side had been replaced. Even the wet nurse, who was the only one who cared about her, had been dismissed. She had completely become all alone. Fortunately, someone suggested that she go to the seaside villa to recover. The climate there was more suitable for her recovery. It was just that the food, clothing, and daily necessities there were far less luxurious than in the palace. So, he had thought the little princess would refuse on the spot. Unexpectedly, the girl agreed without a second thought. Now, she could not wait to leave this troublesome place. As for this trash-like crown prince, whoever wanted the position could have it. She did not want her father's love anymore either. And Tywin and Julia, as well, had nothing to do with her anymore. Now, all she wanted was to go somewhere far away from people, build up her own power. Not for anything else, but simply to stay alive in peace. Rather than placing her life in the hands of others, it was better to cherish herself properly. During this time, the little princess had finally figured it all out. True kindness was not doing nothing, but making the right choices on the premise of having power. So the little princess made up her mind to go recuperate by the sea. She had thought that everyone would be happy after hearing that she was leaving, but unexpectedly, her brother and Tywin were so reluctant to see her go. In order to survive, she decided to stay away from her brother. And this was also the most correct choice she had made since her rebirth. She would no longer yearn for her family's love, nor would she continue trying to please those who had hurt her. But the little princess had not expected that as soon as the news of her going away to recuperate spread, her brother would rush to her bedchamber in a panic. The young man looked at her with a face full of grievance. His big moist eyes looked exactly like those of an abandoned puppy. He pleaded with his sister, asking whether she could stay. They had clearly promised that they would go to the best academy together, but the little princess coldly cut him off. In her previous life, she too had once had such fantasies, so she had studied desperately, only to get into her dream academy. But she should have thought of it long ago. Her father would never allow a useless cripple with no magic to appear in social circles, and even less would he allow the royal family stain to be known by everyone. House arrest was already the greatest mercy shown to her, so even if she had been reborn, so what? It would be better to go recuperate by the sea and keep her eyes free of such filth. The eldest prince still wanted to say something more, but the little princess had already coldly ordered him to leave. At this point, the young man could only turn and leave with disappointment filling his eyes. Time flew by, and 3 days had passed in the blink of an eye. The girl had also packed her luggage and was preparing to leave. And before leaving, the one she was most worried about was Tywin. But when she thought of Julia being by that person's side, her heart began to ache uncontrollably again. And just at that moment, a familiar call came from behind her. It was Tywin. In an instant, the girl's heart began to pound uncontrollably, but in the next second, a lonely expression appeared on her face. She did not want to face Tywin at all, because that person already had a large group of companions following him. In comparison, she was like an unnecessary backdrop. Just as the little princess was about to turn and leave, Tywin suddenly came to her side. The young man's eyes were full of reluctance. Then, he took out a handful of colorful candies from his pocket. Was this specially prepared because he was afraid she would get carsick? The girl's little face immediately turned as red as a ripe apple. She quickly took them from Tywin's hand. Then she heard the young man sadly trying to make her stay, speaking desolately of the regret of parting. And the little princess's thoughts instantly churned into a tangled mess. Could it be that she actually still had a chance to win Tywin back? But in the next second, she dismissed this unrealistic fantasy and decided to leave. Had she not been hated enough in her previous life? After turning around, the little princess quickly walked away, leaving only Tywin standing there all alone. The young man clenched both his hands into fists. He had probably truly fallen for her, but unfortunately, this budding feeling had not even had time to be spoken aloud before it was destined to end without result. So, Your Highness the Imperial Princess, could you come back a little earlier? In the end, the little princess never got to hear Tywin's words of love. At this moment, she was already seated in a speeding carriage, filled with deep reluctance to part from her beloved. She held the handkerchief and the candy together against her heart. It was time to say goodbye to the past. She was going to welcome her brand new life. The girl had never smiled since the day she was born, because as a princess, she was not allowed to smile. She had to maintain the most elegant etiquette at all times. But even so, she still could not gain her father's affection. In the Emperor's eyes, she could never compare to her brother, and her existence was like a mistake made by God. Other than causing trouble, she was good for nothing. So the little princess ran away. She escaped from that suffocating imperial palace. With her own hands, she severed her longing for familial love. She had thought that her future life would sink into endless gloom, but unexpectedly, after leaving those who did not love her, her world finally regained its original colors. The air by the sea was so fresh. Every pore of hers could feel the scent of freedom. A gentle female voice sounded from behind her. This was the new maid the Emperor had arranged for her. It seemed that she still did not know that the person she was to care for was an unloved princess. Otherwise, she would probably have left already. The little princess thought this pessimistically, but then she saw a tall man walking over from beside the maid. That familiar face made the girl's heart jolt in shock. This man was clearly the deputy commander of the knights whom she had killed with her own hands in her previous life. She vaguely remembered that at that time she had only just ascended the throne. In both force and swordsmanship, she had been someone unmatched in the Empire, but the man before her had refused to follow her even unto death. So she had cruelly slit his throat with a single stroke of her sword. Yet fate always loved to play such jokes. In this life, when she was at her most destitute, this arrogant man had become her only subordinate. A trace of sympathy could not help but arise in the little princess's heart. Following her, he was probably destined never to get ahead for his entire life. So, as if possessed, the girl raised her hand. She had originally intended to politely shake hands with the knight, but after waiting for quite a while, she still received no response from the man. The little princess could not help complaining inwardly. This man was still just as arrogant as in her previous life. Sure enough, her sympathy might as well be fed to a dog. But in the next second, the man clumsily gave her a high five. And at this moment, the lonely little princess finally had company. After returning to the secondary palace, the girl sat down by the table. She thought for a long time and in the end wrote a kindness checklist on paper. Since she was preparing to welcome a new life, she ought to have some brand new goals. But what exactly counted as living kindly? This made the little princess feel troubled. Just then, the maid came to bring some snacks. So the girl asked the question that had troubled her for so long. However, by accident, the checklist at her hand was exposed. This made the little maid beside her burst into laughter. It had to be said, the goal of living kindly really was very childish. What she did not know, however, was that those few words carried the meaning of the little princess's survival. In the end, the maid suggested that the little princess smile more. Most kind people love to smile. Such a suggestion made the little princess freeze slightly. Her brother was someone who loved to smile very much. That was why so many people liked him, and she always wore a cold expression. No wonder she was disliked by everyone. The little princess tried hard to search through the few happy memories she had. She worked hard to tug at the corners of her mouth, and then bloomed into a faint smile. The maid at the side was instantly stunned. So it turned out that when her little princess smiled, she was actually this beautiful. But in the next second, the corners of the girl's mouth began to twitch uncontrollably. Having not smiled for so long, she had actually smiled to the point of cramping. She hurriedly drove out the two people who were watching the show beside her. Then she continued improving her kindness checklist. Her father did not love her, and her brother had hurt her. But the little princess still decided that she would be a kind and good person. She could not, just because she had been drenched in rain, go tear up someone else's umbrella. So after struggling for a long time, the girl finally put pen to her kindness checklist. She would atone for her past self. First, do not take things that do not belong to you. You must endure it all. Father belongs to brother. Tywin belongs to Julia. You have nothing, nor should you have anything. Second, save the lives of 1 million people. In the previous life, 500,000 people died in the chaos of war. You must atone for the self you once were. Third, do 3 good deeds every month. Donate at least 10 million each month to those poor people who cannot afford food. They were all once your subjects. Last, smile more. Learn from your brother. No matter how much you hate him, he is still more popular than you. The moment the pen tip stopped, the little princess's eyes were already sore and aching with tears. Perhaps doing these things would not change anything, but she still hoped that in this life, she could keep her heart turned toward the light. After writing this oppressive kindness checklist, the little princess decided to take a walk by the sea. The fine waves lapped at her ankles, while the silent night guarded her from behind. If only the coastline could keep stretching on like this forever. However, after only a few steps, she saw a crying boy not far away. That familiar white hair gave her a sense of déjà vu. It was actually the man who had caused her death in her previous life. Now, he looked like a tearful doll, but who could have imagined that this would become a treacherous courtier as dangerous as poppies? He was like a poisonous snake that tempted Eve. Step by step, he lured the little princess onto the road of no return, of patricide and fratricide. Blinded by hatred, the girl ultimately stepped into the abyss. Yet this man had used his glib tongue to wash himself clean of blame. Ridiculously, the day before he had kissed the back of her hand like a knight, and the next day he personally sent her to the guillotine. Yet looking at the delicate boy before her, the little princess simply could not bring herself to feel hatred. This was nothing like the cunning man she knew. If Ethan had not done those evil things in the previous life, could he too have had a brand new life? At this moment, the little princess silently added another line to her checklist. Save the boy who has gone astray, Ethan. She barely maintained the smile on her face, but the moment she got close, the boy abruptly stood up and ran away. That flustered look was exactly like a frightened little white rabbit. He did not leave the little princess even the slightest chance to stop him. After being rebuffed, little Dorothy instantly lost all interest in taking a walk. But on the way back, the image of the boy in tears lingered in her mind and would not go away. After escaping the palace, the little princess completely began to slack off. But unexpectedly, this version of her instead won everyone's favor. At this very moment, the girl was sitting elegantly on the sofa, and around her, a crowd of noble ladies overflowing with maternal affection had already gathered. In their eyes, little Dorothy was the most perfect child in the world. Though only 8 years old, she was like a little adult, an incomparably adorable appearance paired with a mature and steady personality, plus a serious little face that came with its own sense of cuteness. She was simply a real-life little angel. If not for the fact that this child was a princess, these noble women would probably have long wanted to bring her home as their daughter. So after hearing that the frail little princess could not go out, the strange aunties' hearts instantly overflowed overflowed with pity, and they wished they could personally brew medicine to nurse the girl's body back to health. But the little princess sighed helplessly. The feeling right now was truly awful. It was like more than a dozen older brothers chattering endlessly around her ears. But the upbringing expected of a princess made her continue maintaining her composure. At this moment, a gentle noblewoman caught her attention. This person seemed to be Ethan's mother. The woman smiled and invited her to visit their home. The little princess immediately agreed. She was indeed somewhat worried about Ethan. In her memory, that child was actually the unloved, illegitimate son of the Berlanti family. His father saw him as a stain. He had always favored only the eldest son of pure blood. So, in a sense, the little princess and Ethan were very similar. Both were children not expected by their parents. The little princess wanted to save this pitiful boy. At the very least, she could not let him become, as in her previous life, an evil man covered in sin. So the next day, the little princess went to Ethan's home. The one who received her was the minister, who had spilled wine all over her at the banquet. The girl no longer wanted to bring up that painful memory, so she got straight to the point and said that she wanted to see the young master of the ducal estate. After hearing this, the man's face immediately filled with joy. He thought that his eldest son had caught the princess's eye. However, that child had gone to the Empire's best academy. For the time being, he could not return home. But the little princess said that the person she wanted to see was Ethan. At once, the Duke's expression became awkward, and the girl let out a cold sneer inwardly. Surely this man had long since forgotten that there was also an unloved younger son in the family. He really was exactly the same as her own cold-blooded father. She saw the man whisper a few words to his wife. Then, piling on a smile, he said that Ethan was unwell, which was why he had not come to the front hall to greet the princess. It seemed that the two of them had misunderstood and thought she liked Ethan, but it did not matter. She just happened to need a reason to come often. So, under the arrangements of the Duke and Duchess, she met again the man who had caused her death in her previous life. It had to be said that Ethan, as a child, was really very cute. However, before they had exchanged more than a few words, the boy directly flopped down in front of the little princess. The black-hearted scumbag who had caused her death in her previous life had actually been as cute as a child. That delicate and pitiful look was like a simple little white rabbit. But the little princess knew very well that these were all just false appearances, because Ethan had another secret unknown to others. Whenever he lied, he would unconsciously furrow his brows. So all those sweet words he had said before had all been fake. He had probably approached her for some other purpose. He was probably trying to use her to escape from the ducal estate. The little princess unconsciously fixed her gaze on Ethan's brow, but her gaze was simply too intense. Before long, the boy nervously touched his chin. "Is there something on my face?" The little princess froze on the spot. She could not exactly expose him for lying directly. But now, what reason should she make up? After agonizing for a long time, the little princess ultimately chose to just go all in. Pretending to be calm, she said, "There is handsomeness on your face." The moment the words left her mouth, even the little princess herself felt unbearably embarrassed. How had she come up with such a greasy explanation? The girl only wanted to find a crack in the ground and bury herself on the spot. But what she had not expected was that before she even blushed, a certain little pretty boy became shy first. The boy stammered and covered his little face, that shocked expression making him look exactly like someone being flirted with. If this had been the Ethan from her previous life, he would definitely have shamelessly admitted it outright. The girl could not help beginning to reflect on whether she should not view people through tinted glasses. The next second, the young boy suddenly walked toward her. Before the princess could even react, his soft lips had already gently landed on her cheek. Ethan looked focused and serious. Unfortunately, the little princess herself could not see that at this moment, she looked just like a ripe apple. Even the tips of her pale ears were dyed a vivid red. What on earth was this person doing? How could he just kiss her without a word? But looking at the boy's innocent smile, the little princess could not bring herself to say a single word of reproach. God knew she had absolutely no resistance to sweet words. So, the little princess became even more determined to change Ethan. If both she and he could live on with kindness, could they welcome a different kind of happy ending? Over the next few days, the little princess and Ethan gradually became closer. It had to be said, a cute little boy who knew how to act spoiled was truly heart-melting. The girl also gradually forgot the hurt Tywin had brought her. She did not even want to read the letters her brother had sent anymore. She was really enjoying this laid-back kind of life. Without that group of people who had hurt her, she even smiled more than before. And in the blink of an eye, the little princess also welcomed her 9th birthday. In every previous year, the girl had spent it alone. She just had not expected that this year, someone would actually celebrate it with her, because no one had ever remembered. The 9-year-old her did not even dare to look forward to her birthday. There were no beautiful gifts, nor any warm blessings. There was not even a cake that belonged to her. Gradually, the girl learned not to expect, and stopped expecting anything at all. But little Dorothy never expected that after leaving her family, she would instead receive the first birthday gift of her life. This day was the same as usual, and the little princess came to the dining room early in the morning. She had never imagined that anyone would remember her birthday, but the moment she walked in, The sight before her shocked her speechless. All kinds of delicious food covered the entire dining table. So, was this for her birthday? The next second, an exquisite little party popper burst open above her head. Happy birthday. The girl's eyes instantly reddened. So other than that awful family of hers, there were still people willing to remember her birthday. Then, the maid invited the little princess to take a walk by the sea. But outside the window, dark clouds had already filled the sky. Yet looking at the maid's pitiful little eyes, the girl could only reluctantly agree. So the two of them, one after the other, arrived at the seaside outside the villa. The clever little princess had already roughly guessed it. There was probably some surprise hidden by the sea, and sure enough, after only a few steps, a huge shell appeared on the ground. The little princess could not help but sigh. As expected, she had been treated like a child again. Still, being doted on did not feel bad at all. So the girl began digging seriously. But on the ground, there really was only one shell. She lifted her head in disappointment, only to discover another identical one not far away. She could only continue following the clues. Before long, the girl's arms were already full to the brim, but when she turned around, the maid was nowhere to be seen. The empty seaside was so quiet that it was frightening. And just then, a blurry figure slowly walked out of the sea mist. Judging by the height, no matter how she guessed, it seemed to be Stephen. But when he came closer, the little princess finally saw clearly. It was actually a toy lion from a fairy tale. Then she heard him let out a stiff little roar. The corners of the girl's mouth immediately twitched uncontrollably. Hello, I am the brave lion warrior Leo. That comical voice was so strange that one could hardly recognize the man's original voice. The little princess suddenly realized that this was the very protagonist from the picture book she used to read often. Only later, she had long since replaced fairy tale books with obscure and difficult texts. Yet she had never expected that the maid had remembered all those little details. So this was probably a beautiful misunderstanding. But looking at the big lion's innocent eyes, the little princess suddenly did not want to expose him. She did not want to let down the sincerity of those two people, even if all of this was only a momentary illusion. She also wanted to keep acting along with the man. But what would a 9-year-old child do? The little princess struggled with it for a while, then finally lifted her little face in confusion. Did you come to see me because it's my birthday? Right after that, the big lion crouched down in front of her. His warm big hand gently patted her shoulder. Happy birthday, little Lady Dorothy roar. It was still that comical voice. Actually, even the little princess herself felt somewhat embarrassed listening to it. But for some reason, the girl's vision gradually blurred with tears. They were both doing everything they could to protect her sensitive and tender heart. So she could not give up on herself like she had in her previous life. At this moment, the little princess finally found the meaning of living on. She had someone she wanted to protect. The little princess, who had loved the wrong person in both lives, had finally waited for the lion knight who belonged to her. The man in the mascot suit looked ridiculous and funny, yet he still could not hide that clumsy heart that wanted to protect the little princess. Obviously, something this childish did not suit his identity as a knight at all, but he still did his utmost to play the brave Mr. Lion well. From the very first moment he saw the little princess, he felt that child was mature in a way no child should be. It was clearly the age when children loved to play the most. Yet even the girl's smile carried a burden. Though she looked lively and adorable, she was actually hiding many worries deep in her heart. So when the maid came to ask him to play the lion mascot, the man almost agreed without a second thought. He wanted to see a truly heartfelt smile on the little princess's face and wanted to protect this innocent and kind girl forever. Before long, the sky grew even darker, so Stephen picked up the little princess. His embrace was firm and warm. Even without saying a word, it gave people an inexplicable sense of safety. Along the way, the little princess kept thinking, why had her former self wanted to kill Stephen? Was it because he had once arrogantly opposed her? Or because she had envied that by her brother's side there was such a follower who would rather die than betray him? But none of that was important anymore. In the little princess's heart, a place had long been reserved for her lion warrior. The girl murmured softly, "You used to be someone brave and handsome." Those abrupt words made Stephen freeze for a moment, and the little princess also realized she had said the wrong thing. She had just wanted to explain when she heard Stephen respond comically, "I'm not a person, I'm a lion." At this, the little princess could no longer hold it in. She let out a soft laugh, and tears welled up in her eyes as well. The man was clumsy, yet he was trying with all his might to make her happy. So how could she not work hard too? A bolt of lightning tore across the sky. Immediately after, countless raindrops came crashing down in a rush. A certain lion knight hurriedly pulled the little princess into his arms. The rain soaked through the heavy mascot suit, yet the man did not let even a drop fall on the girl. He quickly ran toward the villa. Before long, they reached the door. But after setting the little princess down, Stephen turned and disappeared into the curtain of rain. Even though his clothes were already soaked through, he simply refused to take off the mascot suit in front of the little princess. He stubbornly protected her in his own way. And the truth also proved that all of this effort was worth it. The little princess was slowly shedding her gloom and moving toward the salvation that belonged to her. Looking at the man's departing figure, the girl softly said, "Thank you. Thank you for protecting me so earnestly." This was almost the happiest day in both of her lives. After returning to her room, the little princess changed into a fresh set of clothes. Then she noticed the letter on the table. Seeing her brother's name on the envelope, she suddenly lost all interest in opening it. She could already imagine what it would say. It was probably sharing those wonderful stories about life at school again. But to her, who had not been able to attend school, it felt more like another kind of silent flaunting. So the little princess casually tossed the letter back onto the table. Instead, she began to wonder whether Stephen, who had gotten caught in the rain, had returned. Yet the moment she stepped out the door, the girl saw the two of them talking quietly. It seemed this birthday surprise had been prepared by them together. So the little princess decided to keep playing along. She pretended to be pleasantly surprised and said that today she had met the lion warrior by the sea. He had even personally wished her a happy birthday. Hearing those words, both of them revealed relieved smiles, and the corners of the little princess's mouth also unconsciously lifted. At this moment, she suddenly wanted to tease the man before her a little. So she asked Stephen whether he had prepared a gift for her. The man immediately looked helplessly at the maid for help, and the little princess added fuel to the fire. She said aggrievedly that she had originally really been looking forward to Stephen's gift. But since there was none, then forget it. The girl was desperately holding back her laughter inside. But unexpectedly, the next second, Stephen was so anxious that he could not even speak properly. Fortunately, the little princess did not continue making things difficult for him. Instead, she said with anticipation that she wanted to learn swordsmanship. In her previous life, she too had once been exceptionally skilled with the sword, but after being reborn, she had never touched a long sword again. She was afraid that if she regained power, she would once again fall into the abyss. But now, she wanted to hold a long sword again, because she already had someone she wanted to protect. Just as Stephen had shown her through his actions, what truly determined good and evil was never the sword, but the heart. She wanted to be kind and also strong. And in the blink of an eye, 3 years passed. During these 3 years, the little princess had continuously studied swordsmanship under Stephen. Because of the foundation from her previous life, her progress could almost be described as advancing by leaps and bounds. And Ethan also often came to the training ground to keep her company. Days like these were peaceful and happy, but no one had expected that a plague would suddenly break out in the detached palace. The little princess was forced to leave this place. In order to save the common people, the little princess decided not to run away anymore. And this was also the first time she displayed her true strength in front of everyone. She was not a delicate flower trapped in a greenhouse, but the resolute empress of the empire. When everyone was panicking because of the plague, the little princess stepped forward without hesitation. She wanted to personally accompany the people through this hardship. So, while the nobles abandoned the city and fled, the girl chose to stay in the city and manage the plague. She took out nearly all of her savings, then had Stephen go to the nearby city to invite the best doctors. And with financial support, everything became much smoother. She even personally went to visit those sick children. She brought them blessings and also hope. And so, under her decisive handling, the plague that had originally seemed impossible to defeat was miraculously brought under control. The streets also returned to their former liveliness, and in the little princess's heart, there arose an unprecedented sense of fulfillment. She had already fallen in love with this land. There were people here whom she wanted to protect, and this was also the new starting point of her life. What surprised the girl even more was that all the effort she had made during this time had been seen by others. The people spontaneously prepared gifts for her. The potatoes in the package were not anything precious, yet they were enough for the girl to remember for the rest of her life. So, doing good deeds was such a joyful thing after all. So the little princess had the maid make the potatoes into dinner. She also happily invited Ethan to stay and eat with her. Meanwhile, the crown prince had no idea what had happened here. At this moment, he was still upset over why his younger sister would not write back to him. A whole year had passed, and he had written almost every day, rain or shine. But his sister seemed as if she no longer wanted anything to do with him. So where exactly had he gone wrong? Tywin was already standing behind him. He also refused to believe that little Dorothy hated them. The girl's every smile and frown had long been engraved in his heart, and they had also promised that they would definitely meet again. So Tywin asked the crown prince whether he wanted to go see his sister. The boy instantly looked like a deflated balloon. It was not that he had never thought of going to find a sister. It was just that the school's rules were far too strict. However, Tywin said that they had already been enrolled for quite a long time and could try asking the teacher. At that, the crown prince's eyes instantly lit up. Haha, she'll definitely be very happy. He almost skipped away. We haven't seen each other in such a long time. She'll definitely be very happy. But when his sister saw him, her reaction was not surprise, but anger. wishing that he would stop disturbing her life. His younger sister, whom he had always loved deeply, had actually changed her heart. The little princess now had Ethan by her side to protect her, and she was not even willing to reply to her brother's letters anymore. That day, the little princess got up early to practice swordsmanship as usual, but she suddenly sensed a familiar presence coming from behind her. The girl quickly drew her sword and thrust it backward. Only then did she see clearly that the person who had come was actually Ethan. The boy's little face was flushed red. Then he raised his hand to wipe away the sweat at the girl's brow. There was not the slightest disgust in that intimate gesture. Instead, it made the little princess dodge away in a bit of fluster. Heaven knew how much she was sweating right now. Yet Ethan smiled and said that the little princess smelled sweet, with the scent of fresh grass, and it smelled nice. The girl's cheeks instantly burned. Across 2 lifetimes, she did not know how many sweet words from Ethan she had heard, but every single time she heard them, she still could not withstand them. And just then, the boy suddenly took her hand as well. The little princess immediately resisted, saying her hands were sticky and dirty, and she wanted to go back and wash them first. But Ethan not only did not let go, he held on even tighter instead. At this moment, this possessive young boy's heart and eyes were filled only with his princess. And in little Dorothy's heart, subtle changes also began to arise. Why was it that though both were forms of persistent companionship, she alone could not bring herself to like her brother's concern? Probably because of jealousy, or perhaps because her brother had never known what she truly wanted. After that, the two of them returned together to the little princess's bedchamber. The simple furnishings were completely unlike what a royal residence should look like. This made Ethan somewhat surprised, but the little princess did not hurry to explain. In fact, in her previous life, she too had once been infatuated with that kind of luxurious life, but only after being reborn did she understand. That material satisfaction could not fill the emptiness in her heart. Even if she wore the most magnificent dress, she would still be the most laughable clown at the banquet. So rather than that, it was better to spend the money on places where it mattered more. But Ethan suddenly took out a necklace. That beautiful ruby was obviously worth a great deal. Yet the little princess rejected it almost without thinking. The boy's little face immediately fell like a deflated balloon. Could it be that you don't like this gift? That pitiful expression instantly gave the girl an overwhelming sense of guilt. She quickly explained that the necklace was far too valuable. You should give it to someone else who is closer to you and more important. Yet the little princess had not expected that her attempt at comfort would only make things worse. Ethan already looked so aggrieved that he was almost about to cry. The little princess could only helplessly change the subject. This guy was really too sly. I still need to continue practicing now. What about you? If this conversation went on any longer, she was afraid she might fall into this man's trap again like in her previous life. So the little princess tactfully indicated that she still had other things to do. But Ethan seemed as though he was not listening at all. His attention was completely drawn to the pile of letters stacked like a mountain on the table. The boy could not help asking about them curiously, and the little princess's eyes gradually dimmed. From those letters sent to her from school, she could feel the concern hidden inside them, but because of her inferiority, she was unwilling to open them. She did not want to hear her brother complain about the hardships of being crown prince, nor did she want to know how happy his life at the academy was. That would only cruelly tear open the wound she had been desperately trying to hide, making her realize how ridiculous a princess abandoned in a remote place truly was. She was destined to walk a path completely opposite to her brother's, and in the end, they would only grow farther and farther apart. The little princess prepared to leave with an indifferent expression. However, Ethan called out to her from behind. "What is this?" The boy pointed at the neatly stacked men's handkerchiefs on the table. The little princess instantly felt as if her secret had been exposed, and the bit of sadness she had just felt vanished with it. She hurriedly stuffed the handkerchiefs back into the drawer, but Ethan had already seen Tywin's name on them. Could this be the person the little princess liked? It seemed he had to speed things up even more. His little sister was going to fall in love, and the person she liked was not him. So, far away at school, her brother decided to return. He absolutely would not allow another man to bully his little princess. So, the crown prince wrote a letter to inform his sister. However, the little princess merely glanced at it and casually tossed it aside. Instead, her attention was drawn to another letter addressed to Stephen. Logically speaking, as a guard of the imperial princess, he would hardly ever be contacted by anyone specifically in daily life. Yet the expression on the man's face as he read the letter was unusually heavy. That made the little princess unable not to worry. And Stephen told her that it was a notice for a promotion exam. The maid excitedly offered her congratulations from the side, but the little princess knew very clearly what that meant. Once he passed the promotion, Stephen would leave here and go to the imperial capital. This was almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for advancement. She should have been happy for Stephen, but that also meant that they might never see each other again. The girl forced out a smile uglier than crying as she spoke words of blessing, but inside, Her heart hurt, as if it were bleeding. If only Steven would not leave. But she could not be that selfish. She could not ruin someone else's future just because she was reluctant to part. A knight as outstanding as him should not waste his youth in a remote place. So, the little princess asked Steven for the notice letter, and there was already very little time left before the exam written on it. That meant they had to set out by this week at the latest. So, they did not even have time to say a proper goodbye. The girl lowered her head helplessly and told Steven that it was okay. She could take care of herself on her own, too. Someone as excellent as Steven deserved better and more opportunities. But by the end, the little princess's voice grew softer and softer. She put down the pride she had as a princess and softly begged the knight if he could leave just one day later. Even one more day would be enough. She wanted to hold a lively farewell banquet for him. The girl's voice had already taken on a sob. The next second, Steven knelt on one knee before the little princess. He gently cupped the girl's little face. Tenderly and solemnly, he told her that he would not leave. At this moment, the little princess was completely stunned. Tears blurred her eyes. How could her lion knight be so foolish? If he missed this chance, there might never be another opportunity in the future. But Steven said calmly, protecting the princess was his duty. He was only doing what he truly wanted to do. Looking at the man's sincere smile, the little princess suddenly understood. Why had he not chosen her in her previous life? Because back then, the person he wanted to protect was her brother. So even knowing clearly that Lei's ending was destined to fail, he still did everything in his power to protect the one he loved. At this moment, the little princess threw herself hard into the man's arms. Call her selfish, call her greedy if they wanted. From now on, she would never let Steven leave again. The genius princess reborn as a child was looked down on the spot by the organizer of a swordsmanship competition. So, the slighted little Dorothy decided to slap them hard in the face. She would let everyone see her true strength. That day, the girls secretly slipped out of the detached palace, as usual. In order not to attract attention, she had even deliberately disguised herself as a commoner's child. And Steven had also taken off his knight's outer robe. Walking on the street, they looked like a real brother and sister. The little princess noticed the crowd gathered beneath the city wall. Out of curiosity, she tried hard to look inside, but unfortunately there were simply too many onlookers. Just as the little princess was feeling disappointed, a pair of large hands gently passed under her arms. With almost no effort at all, Steven lifted her high into the air. Only then did she finally see clearly that the city was going to hold an amateur swordsmanship competition. This instantly aroused the little princess's interest. In her previous life, her favorite thing to do had been to study swordsmanship. But in order to please her father, she had to give up those so-called useless hobbies. Now that she had been given a second life, she finally had the chance to live for herself. Let's go sign up. No matter what, she was going to participate in this competition. So the two of them went together to the registration site. And after the organizer saw the little princess, he immediately revealed a contemptuous smile. As if watching a joke, he urged the girl to hurry home. This was not a place for a little brat like her to play house. That arrogant attitude immediately made the little princess frown. Clearly, the notice said that as long as one met the age requirement, one could participate. Yet the organizer went back on his word on the spot. In a nasty tone, he accused the girl of having no manners and even started insulting the little princess's father. This time, little Dorothy could not endure it anymore. She angrily prepared to draw her sword. She was going to teach this promise-breaking organizer a lesson. However, in the next second, Steven's sword had already been driven heavily into the tabletop. The sharp blade pressed tightly before the organizer's nose. Having never seen such a scene before, the man was so frightened he nearly went limp on the spot. Thus, the little princess successfully completed the registration. But just as she stepped onto the street, she ran into Ethan head-on. At this moment, the boy looked like the lowest servant, his arms full of all kinds of things. And the boy walking in front of him was still complaining that he was too slow. If she guessed correctly, that person should be Ethan's older brother, the legitimate eldest young master of the Duke's family. And just then, a bang suddenly came from Ethan's side. The boy fell heavily to the ground, and the things in his arms shattered all over the floor. Ethan's little hands were cut until they were a bloody mess. But not only did his older brother turn a blind eye to it, he even viciously slapped him hard across the face. At that instant, the little princess could no longer sit still. She told Steven to stop that arrogant boy first. She herself immediately ran over to check Ethan's injuries. The boy's cheek was already swollen high. Those misty eyes of his were filled with grievance. That made the little princess feel even worse. Although she was still somewhat half doubtful about Ethan being bullied, looking at the boy's pitiful appearance, the girl still attributed all of it to his being still young. And at just this moment, the Duke's eldest son, who had been stopped, had already become furious from humiliation. He loudly questioned the little princess whether she knew who he was, and the girl merely let out a cold laugh. In this world, other than her brother and her father, no one had ever asked her such a stupid question. Though she was clearly the imperial princess concealing her strength, she was instead being questioned about her noble princess identity. If you're a princess, then I'm the crown prince. The boy looked utterly full of himself, yet he had no idea that the only true princess of the royal family was standing right in front of him. Originally, Little Dorothy had only come out to clear her mind. Yet she had not expected that after walking only a few steps, she would run into Ethan being humiliated. The boy's cheek was swollen high. His pitiful look was exactly like a bullied little puppy. The little princess immediately stepped in front of him, but a certain arrogant young master became furious from embarrassment because of it. "Do you know who I am?" The boy's tone carried blatant showing off, but in the little princess's eyes, he was nothing more than a laughable clown. "Then, do you know who I am?" the girl asked calmly in return. Her beautiful eyes were filled with danger. For no reason, the boy felt a burst of panic, but his prideful and arrogant nature made him refuse to back down. Dressed so poorly, what status could you possibly have? He raised his hand high, preparing to strike, but he was stopped by the knight beside her. The boy instantly panicked. The arrogance on his face was gone, leaving only fear. Yet the little princess looked on as though she were watching a play. If this had been her previous life, she would already have killed him. Unfortunately, after being reborn, she had decided to be a good person, so she coldly revealed her identity and warned that certain young master to mind his place. Otherwise, she would not mind becoming a bad person again. After saying that, little Dorothy took Ethan's hand and turned to leave. What happened today would reach the Duke's ears before long, and punishment would naturally not be lacking. And what she needed to do now was go home. Only, the little princess had not expected that just after returning to the manor, she would run into the person she least wanted to see in this life. The boy sweetly called out sister. The moment they met, he excitedly threw himself at her, and the sudden intimacy made the girl instinctively dodge away. When she looked up, she met Tywin's affectionate gaze. They were wearing neat academy uniforms, looking elegant and proper, completely out of place beside her bedraggled self. At this moment, the little princess had no choice but to hide herself away. Why did they have to appear every single time when she was at her most miserable? She had clearly already decided to forget the past and live well. So, why did they still have to torment her again and again? It took her 3 years to barely heal those painful wounds, only for them to be torn open again, bloodily and brutally. In despair, she pulled her brother back into the room, then turned around and locked the door heavily. She wanted to cry, to roar, to scream, but in the end, it all only turned into sorrowful questions. She wanted to ask her brother whether he had ever truly loved her. Why did he have to bring Tywin to humiliate her already miserable life? He even wanted to kill her. What she did not know was that the boy before her loved her enough to die for her. In her brother's heart, nothing was more important than his sister's happiness. Sadly, the little princess had misunderstood him in the end, because in Dorothy's eyes, everything her brother did was harm. He monopolized everyone's favoritism. He watched his sister struggle in love without getting what she wanted, and in the end, he still put on the face of a saint. She had clearly already prepared herself to start over. So, why did he still have to bring Tywin to provoke her? Was it just to see her in a miserable state, or to show off his colorful life at the academy? At this moment, sensitivity and inferiority blinded the girl. She could not see the pure tenderness in her brother's eyes. Instead, she stubbornly believed that his appearance was meant to humiliate her. This realization made the little princess completely break down, and she no longer cared about the elegance expected of a princess. She only wanted to escape from Tywin's gaze. The girl pulled her brother into the nearest room. The moment she turned around, she began pressing him aggressively with questions. Why did he have to disturb her life? Why could he not respect her thoughts? The girl violently shook off her brother's hand, and the boy could only stand there helplessly, not knowing that what he had done would cause such great hurt. He had only missed his sister. He missed her so much that he could neither eat nor sleep. On the day he was finally able to come see her, he was so happy, he almost felt like flying. But now, all explanations seemed pale and powerless. The boy could only stammer that he had wanted to give little Dorothy a surprise. But the next second, the girl cut him off abruptly. She said coldly that this was not a surprise, but a shock. Her brother cried in grievance, but it was not because of her scolding. He was only afraid that little Dorothy would ignore him from now on. The boy carefully apologized to his sister. She rubbed her brow tiredly, while the irritation in her heart only grew stronger. Her brother always looked like this, like the victim, when clearly the one who had suffered all the grievances was herself. In the end, she instead looked like a vicious supporting villainess who had done every bad thing. The little princess's eyes ached with stinging soreness, yet she refused to show her weakness in front of outsiders. She understood clearly that only those who were favored had the right to cry and make a scene. As for her tears, they would only be treated as a ridiculous joke of unreasonable behavior. Her father's favoritism made her stubbornly shut away her heart. But in just a few days, the truth of the previous life would be completely revealed. The brother she had always looked down on was actually a powerful swordsmanship genius, and in the previous life, he had willingly died by his sister's hand. Only after his sister left did her brother and Tywin finally see their own hearts clearly. The one they had deeply loved all along was the heart-wrenching little Dorothy, and to them, Julia was merely a friend. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed since their separation. They had heard quite a few rumors about the little princess. It was said that by her own strength alone, she had managed to contain the spreading plague. They had also heard that she personally took care of those displaced commoners. This was a side of her Tywin had never seen before. She was tenacious and free, like a flower blooming on a cliff. Even the harshest environment could not destroy her beauty. And at this moment, Tywin suddenly panicked. He was afraid that other suitors might appear by the girl's side. That was why he had come from far away to visit her, while she was recuperating. It was just that Tywin had not expected the little princess's emotions to be so intense. The girl wanted to flee unilaterally. At that moment, his body's reaction was faster than his mind. Tywin grabbed Dorothy's arm. He frantically explained why he had come, speaking with utmost tenderness of the worry he had carried for 3 whole years. He had personally witnessed the suffering the girl had once endured, so he wanted even more to stay and shield her from the wind and rain. After saying that, the boy devoutly dropped to one knee. His solemn manner made it seem as if he were proposing to the girl he loved. The little princess froze on the spot, her eyes widening in disbelief. Yet waves of stabbing pain came from her heart. She remembered the previous life. She remembered the version of herself who had thrown away her dignity and begged bitterly. What had Tywin's reaction been at that time? It seemed that every time, all he left her with was a resolute, retreating figure. The little princess understood clearly that Tywin loved Julia, so after being reborn, she learned to let go and fulfill that love. Her love for Tywin had long since turned to utter despair. Even though the boy confessed to her with complete sincerity, she could no longer recover the feeling of being moved as she once had. The little princess lowered her head sadly, forcing back her grievance and refusing to let her tears fall. But then she heard Ethan calling her. With that red and swollen little face, the boy pitifully acted spoiled toward her. At that moment, the gloom in the little princess's heart suddenly dispersed. She should not stay obsessed with those unbearable past events. Instead, she should bid the past farewell with grace. Thinking of this, she hurriedly gave an explanation, saying that she needed to take care of a guest. Then she turned and pulled Ethan away from the scene, the little princess walking very quickly. So she did not see Ethan's provocative look behind her, nor did she see the unwillingness in Tywin's eyes. She simply thought that Ethan had really come to ask for medicine. So she patiently began searching through the pharmacy. She wanted to numb her heart through busyness. But the next second, warm breath brushed near her ear. The little princess's face instantly flushed red. In her previous life, they had once shared such intimate gestures too, but that had all been a long time ago. She awkwardly closed her eyes, but the boy's lips had already moved close. His kiss was light, and it came with a softly spoken confession. And it was precisely this one sentence, "I like you," that instantly pulled the little princess out of the moment. The Ethan of her previous life had been exactly such a shameless old fox. He flirted with her every few days. This was probably some boring prank again. She did not fantasize in the slightest that Ethan would fall in love with her. Focusing on her career was still more reliable. It was just that the girl had never expected that these two would fight over her. The little princess, heartbroken, began focusing on her career. But she had not expected that after giving up and going with the flow, she would instead win everyone's favor. Tywin and Ethan became jealous rivals because of her. Even her brother developed different feelings toward her. He had just been thrown out of the little princess's room when he ran over to Tywin and smugly showed off in a sly, affected way. He had just kissed the goddess's little cheek, and she had even gently applied medicine for him. They could meet every weekend, and the kind where they stayed together for the entire day. Ethan deliberately exaggerated the relationship between himself and little Dorothy. His purpose was to make Tywin retreat in the face of difficulty. He understood clearly who the little princess truly held in her heart, so he had to work even harder to squeeze that person out. The boy stopped Tywin's hand as he was about to open the door. Then, without changing expression, he began to lie. He said the little princess was tired and needed rest, and the innocent Tywin believed it just like that. Though his heart was full of unwillingness, he could only leave, and where he could not see. A certain little green tea revealed a smile of conspiratorial triumph. He would not allow anyone to interfere in his relationship. Here, Tywin and Ethan parted on bad terms. No one noticed the crown prince still sitting where he was. He hugged himself pitifully, his mind full of his sister's resolute departing figure. Why didn't she like him? Was it because he had not performed well enough, and so people disliked him? Compared to his clever sister, he was like a useless fool. He could not even manage to make people like him. No wonder his sister was unwilling to reply to his letters, who would like a silly little fool who loved to cry. The boy forced his tears back. His thin body trembled uncontrollably from sadness. If his existence would make his sister unhappy, then he would turn and leave without the slightest hesitation. Just then, A maid discovered the child curled up in the corner. She had long heard that the brother and sister had gotten into a conflict in the front hall, so she stepped forward to ask about the boy's condition. But then she saw the crown prince raise that little face covered in tear marks. He did not know what he had to do to gain his sister's approval, and the only thing his foolish self could think of was to do what his sister liked. The maid said that the little princess would get up before dawn to study swordsmanship, and so hope flared in the crown prince's heart. His swordsmanship was super invincibly amazing.